Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Daniel C. Daniel, welcome.
Thanks, Heather. I can't wait to be here.
I know I brought yet another Aussie on. I'd love for you to give listeners a background. Where do you live and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am an Aussie. You'll hear it in my accent. And I live in Tasmania, which is a tiny island, well, a small island at the bottom of Australia. It's part of Australia. You've probably heard of the Tasmanian Devil if you watched too many Looney Tunes cartoons when you were young, although it's not quite like that. So I have three kids. I'm married and I am a productivity consultant. So I do training, speaking. I also write books about making space from too much technology and about how to be more productive by rethinking our relationship with the online world. Yeah, that's what I do at the moment.
Well, and we're definitely going to deep dive that whole idea of space making. But ultimately, do you talk a lot about how maybe society globally that we're more disconnected than ever?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the hallmarks that I see in the leaders I coach and the people I speak with is that there's this strange thing where we're more connected than ever before, clearly through the internet and through social media.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing that you and I can now have a relationship from the other side of the world. We can connect on LinkedIn and continue hearing about each other's lives after this conversation. And yet, people have a lot less energy for actual face-to-face relationships. So there's less community neighborhood relationships. There's even post-COVID less time in person with some of the people we really care about. Almost everyone I coach at the moment says their relational capital, so their time with people they really care about in person, is actually lower, and their life is so frantic it's hard to find space for people and connection. And the research is showing that that's actually leading us to be less happy and to feel less connected and more lonely,
Yeah.
which is a paradox, isn't it? That the more connected
Yeah.
we are online, the less connected and the less whole we feel as communities. And so we need to think through that from a research perspective and also from a practical productivity perspective.
Well, and how I notice it in my world is, every morning at the gym in the sauna, if there's a bunch of people sitting in there, everybody's on their phone scrolling. And I'm sitting there a lot of times, well, I don't want my phone to overheat, so it's outside, but I might be doing a guided meditation, or sometimes I do sit and chat. But you're right. And I did it one morning, it was jam packed, like 20 people in the sauna. Everybody's on their phone, and mine was outside because I like talking to people. And so I happened to drum up conversation with the guy across from me. And then another chimed in. And by the time we were done with the sauna sesh, everybody was in there. We introduced ourselves. And now we have sort of a little gym crew, but it's because like we disconnected for a moment.
Wow, isn't that amazing? I mean, the sauna is that classic, like, I'm jealous. I must admit, I'm jealous. But imagine the sauna is that place where you want to relax and be present and feel your body. I mean, and just how and stretch the muscles, let alone talk to people. So, but when we're just on our screens, we're not really present, even if we're not talking with people next to us. So that's a fascinating experience. That even those beautiful moments that where you would historically think this is like the iconic moment sitting in a sauna and relaxing, we're
Right.
not fully present because of our screens.
Or even, if you're out to eat with people and at a restaurant or whatever, and they're on their phone. But anyway, something else I want to bring up because I want to get your perspective. If you have any background in this, I saw a video last week. It happened to be TikTok, but whatever. But it was a news anchor having this conversation on why dating in today's world, because I refuse to do it, but people, swiping.
Hmm.
So again, this whole idea that we're so disconnected that we no longer have, like verbal cues and body language and like that masculine, feminine energy, like that's so removed because we're trying to look through a screen, trying to meet a match.
Yeah. So, would you like my opinion on that? Uh, Even look, before I speak about that specifically, again, there's some benefits to online dating. Clearly, because of the way we shape our lives, if you're trying to find someone, I mean, if I was trying to find someone, I probably would try to find someone online, probably not Tinder, but at least consider that. But the problem with what you're talking about is that technology can be really useful in almost every field. That's why I say that. So even in dating, for example.
Yeah.
And yet, if you overuse technology or if you use it in a dehumanizing way, well, then it actually destroys your humanity and your connections. And so clearly, in the example you've shared, I really think you're not looking for a person, you're looking for an image, and
Yeah.
you're commercializing one another, and you're exchanging relationships in a transactional way, which doesn't lead to the kind of lifelong love and happiness and sacrifice and for better or worse type of relationship that you're actually longing for. So again, we need to reflect on how we're using technology. When is it benefiting us, but where is it dehumanizing us? And then be intentional in engaging in tech in a healthier way.
Okay. So
But
now,
without putting judgments, obviously, on people who are
yeah,
using it in slightly different ways.
look, to each your own, but like I'm in a group of, I'd say there's like 8 girlfriends. We're all kind of the same age, whatever. And yeah, it's kind of, it doesn't work, right? It's insanity doing the same thing over and over, expecting new results. So I would love for you to talk more about your thing,
Mm.
space makers, and why it's so important to disconnect and tune within and to create that space.
Absolutely. So look, I mean, I think you said in our pre-interview chat that you're a recovering type A. Is that what you said? I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would be the same. I love working. I love achieving things. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I broke my leg during COVID and I was in bed for 6 weeks. And at the end of it, I realized I'd started a non-profit and I didn't realize it. So it's kind of, oh, I just love doing stuff. But I found myself, a number of years ago, more than a decade ago, when I was a physiotherapy or a physical therapist, you'd say in the States, I was managing a bunch of services. I had young kids. I was building my own house, laboring on my own house. I was serving in my church. I was doing a side hustle business, and I thought I was a superhero, and and I loved it. But then I started to find that I wasn't sleeping well, and I wasn't very happy. My wife says she knows that I'm getting kind of unhealthy when I stop making bad dad jokes. I stopped making bad dad jokes. And then I found myself struggling with breathlessness. And that was the sign there's something wrong here. And I was breathless when I spoke in front of my team. And then I found I was breathless when I was just at the dinner table, just sitting. And then I was breathless reading books to my young kids at night. And it started making me worried. And I had all these tests, lung function tests, etc. And there was nothing wrong with me physically. I'm a fit person. And the doctor heard about my life and he's like, I think this is anxiety. And I just didn't recognize it as anxiety and stress.
Yeah.
And so that was a wake up call. It was like, oh, okay. And I had a friend who had similar symptoms actually, and he had them a few years before, and he ended up truly burning out, not being able to work, ending up hospitalized, and never returned to his capacity ever again, actually. And I didn't want to follow his path. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, that was a time where I started to reflect on, okay, why am I so driven in this way? What are my deeper values? Who do I want to be when I'm 80? What do I want to be known for? How do I want to live? And how can I achieve the things that I'm passionate about in a different way, from the inside out rather than from the outside in, from a well of maybe peace or rest rather than anxiety and action. And that, I mean, it's taken me a long time, but your question around, what am I passionate about? Well, I'm passionate about space and making space. My book is called Space Maker. And some of what I learned during that journey and that I've continued to learn is about how do you make space in the clutter of life, to think deeply, to rest fully, to reconnect with people who you really care about, to do your best work and live your best life in an intentional way by making space to really think deeply about it. But for most of us, we won't have space if we don't reflect on how we use technology and if we don't reflect on how we use our time, which is why I became a productivity consultant.
Well, in my experience, especially I feel like in America, we glorify hustle and grind. And it's like you want to one up each other, how busy and like how stressed and burnout you can get. Like they literally put it up on a pedestal. And even with my coaching clients, I've worked with some very successful, we're talking like multi-millionaires who
Hmm.
only found out like they weren't happy and fulfilled. So we know it's not money. But I ended up, a question I walk my clients through is like, what's your definition of success? Like I decided, I woke up one day and I was like, the American dream is not my dream. I didn't want to climb the corporate ladder and get all these accolades and burnout because like it wasn't fulfilling. So
Hmm.
what I heard from you ultimately is like you had a lot of self-reflection and awareness, but it seems like you also had ultimately like a paradigm shift.
Definitely, definitely. And I think I mean, I love the title of your podcast. If you want to change, if you want to change your habits, if you want to change your life, in fact, your identity. I mean, even James Clear in Atomic Habits says that what we do shapes our identity. And so it does, it begins with a mindset shift, a paradigm shift. And not just one, a constant repetitive shifting of your paradigm and the ability to be a learner who reflects on why you do what you do and changes. I love one of my one of the authors I love is Eugene Peterson, who's a spiritual author, and he said that my wife has been married to 7 different men, uh, and all of them were me. And I really like that idea that actually, if you're someone who learns and grows and allows yourself to reflect and have paradigm shifts, you will actually be 7 different people in your life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it in an inauthentic way. I mean that you realize, wow, that old me doesn't fit now, or that's a dumb way of being, or that was for a season, and I actually genuinely need to shift who I am and change my habits in reflection of where I am now, and also my stage of life. And I'd like to be that type of person where my wife has been married to 7 different men and they're all me.
Yeah. Okay, question for you because this is coming to mind and we sort of touched on it previously. Like Carol Dweck talks about it in her book Mindset, but I don't think there are fixed mindset or growth mindset. I think we all have that growth mindset. It's more or less a choice. That's been my experience. But I want to ask you what you just shared, this whole idea of identity shifting, which I would love to talk more about that. As an example, before I go there, Dr. Joe Dispenza says your personality, which is made up of how you think, act, and feel, creates your personal reality. And most people try to change their current results or outcomes, their reality, by being the same person. You can't think, act, and feel the same and right definition of insanity. So on
Hmm.
that note, the idea of where I was going with that is, like I feel like there are kind of two lanes. Those living in autopilot, going through life's motions, dreading Friday, cheering on Monday, been there, done that. Versus those who kind of are more conscious creators, living mindfully, intentionally, curious, e- evolving. That's how I see two different paths.
Hmm.
How would what do you say?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a very different way in which you live when you reflect. Uh, not to get religious, one of the teachings of Jesus, which is most un unexamined and misunderstood, is he says we need to repent and believe. And repent actually means metanoia. That's the word in Greek. Meta means big, noia means mind. So literally, Jesus is saying repent means to change your mind, which we don't realize. We think it means don't be a bad person.
Mm,
and so the tenet of Jesus' teaching is we need to change our mind and we need to shift our behavior in response to that mind shift change. That's
yeah.
pistoa, is believe. Believe is not something you think, it's actually something you do. So all the ancients have said the same thing, that there needs to be a shift in mindset based on your experiences of life, based on these new reflections, and then a change in behavior. And when you continually change your mind, change your behavior, change your mind, change your behavior, you live life like a slinky. So instead of going in the direction you would have headed, well, then you
Uh-huh.
head off in a very, very different direction. Uh, and with that teaching itself, he actually says the time has come, which is kairos. So it's not TikTok time like the time we talk about when we look at our watch. It's a significant moment in time, a moment of significance. So when those moments hit us, when I break my leg, when I realize I yelled at my kids and I was a jerk, when I'm super anxious before I do my talk and I treat people badly, or when I do something that is super generous and I surprise myself. The kairos, the time those moments are here, therefore change our mind and change your behavior, and you'll end up living a very different life. That's the spiritual life, from my understanding, and I think that probably has some connection with what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I think what was last year? Well, I think it was, I don't know if it was 21 or 22, but the Great Resignation. Then it's like the Great
Mm.
Awakening. And, I think more and more of humanity is realizing like we've been conditioned to believe a very limited perspective of how things could be. Not to go down that rabbit hole.
Mm.
I want to ask you, because actually, can you talk about, you said you did 6 weeks of silence. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a really painful experience in the end. I had a sabbatical coming up, and for me, a sabbatical was, I suppose, long service leave. But I wasn't calling it that because after 10 years, I was really tired. This was a year and a half ago, and I really wanted to just think deeply. I'm in my mid 40s, and I knew there was gonna be a shift in my career and what I focused on, and so I wanted some time. But then a week before my sabbatical, my very closest, most dear friend just suddenly died of a heart attack. And we live in community, so we actually share land together, and we've built two houses, and we've spent 10 years, well, 15 years raising kids in kind of genuine community. And he just died of a heart attack, and I tried to resusc him, and he didn't live. So that was pretty traumatic, and traumatic for all of us. Uh, and so we ran the funeral. And then my wife was delightful. She said, "You know what? You still need to go away." And so I had 3 weeks of silence rather than six. Then I had 2 weeks with my family, kind of just hanging out. And then I had another 3 weeks of silence. And I went to a little place that was like a wooden hut, with an outdoor bath that I had to kind of literally heat up wood to get myself to have a bath. And I walked on the beach for 2.5 hours a day, and I made myself some juk, which is like Chinese congee, because I'm Chinese by origin. And I just lived simply, read books and reflected and prayed and meditated. And I did it for a long time. And it was hard. It was hard, but it was really transformative. And it's changed who I am again. I think my wife ended up being married to a different husband afterwards.
Yeah. Well, but look, even that note, I've dabbled in meditation for years. And I remember when I first started, it is uncomfortable because we're so used to go, go, go. And I felt every time I would sit, my thoughts, my to-do list, everything would go crazy. And so it's actually my mom who taught me. She's like, Heather, when that happens, when the thoughts come in, think of them as clouds and let them pass by. Because whatever you resist persists, right? So if we're
Mm.
sitting there and we're trying to shut it down because we're, quote, supposed to be silent, it creates more internal chaos. So that helped me. But I also found now I've gone as long as a 4 hour meditation, again, with Dr. Joe Dispenza. But what I love about Dispenza is when I attended his meditation retreat, is he teaches that you have to sit through the fire of discomfort. Because when we're used to go, 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 and now we're trying to create that inner peace and calm, we're addicted to stress and we're addicted to these emotions and all the things. And now it's literally breaking an addiction, right? So I'd love to know, because not everybody has an opportunity to go away for 3 weeks, but I think everyone has time, or it's a choice, to set aside even 20 minutes in the morning or the evening, 20 minutes a day to sit in the silence. What would you offer for somebody who's new to this?
Absolutely. So I agree, start small. So in my book, Space Maker, I give a whole lot of very practical patterns that I've developed. So, I mean, a week away without too much tech is pretty full on. And that's my that's the digital detox. And obviously 6 weeks is not attainable for many people, even though it is an amazing experience if you can learn to do that. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I read a research study by, you may have heard of this one. It was by Timothy Wilson from the University of Virginia, and he wanted to give people some silence to find out how they thought. Uh, And so he put them in a room and he took away their devices and he just said, spend 6 to 15 minutes thinking your own thoughts, reflecting essentially. And he asked people how they found that experience. And the majority of people said that it was a painful experience. They used the word pain.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about. And so then he was like, what do they mean by pain? So he wanted to compare what they meant. And so I don't know how they got ethics approval, but they end up zapping people with painful electrodes, which was so painful that people would pay $5 not to be zapped again. And then he put them in a room and he said, okay, I want you to have 6 to 15 minutes of silence. This is a new cohort. There's that painful zapping machine in the corner. I wouldn't recommend you use it, but I suppose you could if you wanted to. And 67% of men and 25% of women chose to give themselves painful electric shocks rather than sit and enjoy 6 minutes of silence without a device. That says something, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
and I've reflected on that. I'm like, well, what is it about us? And I think it's that if we are so used to reaching for our phone and filling our mind with notifications and hustle and bustle, and if we are trying to outrun our depression or outrun our anxiety or outrun our fears and our loss of self or identity or our disappointments by being busy, which many of us are doing, either by being busy or distracted, well,
Uh,
then yes, it makes sense. If you have 6 to 15 minutes to think deeply about your life, it's very painful because it's like you have this well of emotions that start to come up, and therefore you'd rather physically electrocute yourself than experience it. And
yeah.
that's not to make fun of you. That's to say that that's a hard reality. But what I noticed with the silent retreat, or with having a daily pause, starting and ending the day without technology, or having a digital free meal, or just journaling every day and saying, doing some prayer or meditation, like if you can learn to build up your silence and space muscles and disconnect from your devices and build up from 5 minutes a day to 10 minutes a day. Maybe just start by writing 3 things you're thankful for and just sitting for 5 minutes. And if you feel something, allow yourself to feel it. If you think something that's uncomfortable, well, then allow yourself to think it. It doesn't have to be your final reality, but it is what your body is telling yourself to think. And and over time, like exercise, this is my physical therapy background, you will build up your space muscles, your silent muscles, your ability to um, be quiet and reflect. And the beautiful thing at the end of it, and this is what I found with my 6 weeks, is that you realize that you're okay and that you're enough, and that there is beauty in the simplicity. I remember sitting, somewhere in my 6 weeks, and just I spent like hours just looking at some eucalypts, some gum leaves, just blowing in the wind, and I felt just really peaceful and happy. And uh, I had grieved so many of my sad feelings, and I'd sat in, I didn't finish my grief in 6 weeks. I mean, this is my closest friend, but I came to a place, of just realizing that I didn't need all that stuff. I don't know. It's hard to explain when your inner life is at peace and when your inner life is enough. And then your outer life is an expression of what's happening inside rather than your outside trying to outrun the inside. And that's what space does if you practice it. And that's why it's worth it. Because who you are is how you lead. And wherever you go, you are. There you are. So you can't outrun yourself.
Dude,
So you might as well
yeah,
put the work there.
you 100% took it out of my mouth because I remember in high school, I cut it out of a magazine and I used like scotch tape to protect it or whatever. And I put it in my wallet. And the saying was, wherever you go, there you are. And right, because it's uncomfortable and people don't want to feel it, you're right. You can't outrun you. And so, what are the numbing agents? Food, alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, all of them.
Technology.
Right, numbing, scrolling on social, and like you can follow down those rabbit holes for hours. But anyway, I love the saying, and a coach I had years ago taught me this: like you have to feel it to heal it.
Hmm.
Since you can't outrun you, if you don't feel that fear, that anxiety, that unworthiness, if you don't feel it, it festers inside the body, right? Like emotions are energy in motion. They want to be released, they want to be felt. How would you offer somebody who's new to this to begin a digital detox?
Mm. So there's a few ways I'd look at it. One is it is hard, but it's not impossible. I would, if you want to reflect on your relationship with technology and just get a sense of what your habits are and how much you're distracting yourself, how much you're electrocuting yourself with notifications,
Yeah.
rather than feeling or thinking, then choose a day on the weekend. Let people know, okay, I'm not going to be available this day, and turn off everything, no devices. So no phone, no tablets, no TV, and have a full day simply without technology. Okay. And that's hard, but it's not radical. We used to be able to have a day, like I'm 45, that was called life when I was young.
Yeah.
and and so yeah, and have a day without tech and just use it as a heart experiment, like a biofeedback on experiment on yourself, where you're feeling your emotions and wondering, oh, I'm feeling really uncomfortable because I don't know what's happening in the world. And I'm feeling my phone in my pocket because it's vibrating, but there's no phone. And, or does that make sense? And so, on the one hand, you want to disconnect from the distraction to make the space, but you never want to fast without feasting. Is what the ancients say. So, uh, people, in fact, Cal Newport would say when he's looked at people who have done digital minimalism and disconnected, well, then the ones who sustain an ongoing unplugging as a habit are ones who fill their space with something else. So you have to fill it with something meaningful and valuable.
Mm.
And so not only do I encourage you to spend that day disconnecting, but fill it with something that matters. So go to the sauna and have a beautiful sauna, and that's all you do. Like, be present, or get in the garden, or go for a bike ride, or play board games with the kids, or do things analog, and fill your life with things that have high value but that are being neglected in your life. Have a coffee with a friend, but tell them they're not allowed to use their phone as well, so that you can have an actual coffee. uh,
Yeah.
and and get a sense of how it feels. It won't necessarily be joyful and easy, uh, but it'll give you some data, and then by reflecting on the data of that experience, you'll be able to learn some things about how technology is used as a bit of an opioid for you, or where it's valuable and what you genuinely missed for the right reasons, but also what are the things that are being neglected in your life by not disconnecting and by not unplugging, and therefore how are you missing out on the fullness and the breadth and depth of what humanity can offer you because you're only online. That's one idea. There's many others I have, but that's one start.
I'll share with you something. I don't know how I didn't know about this sooner, but about a year ago is when I found out that whole do not disturb function on your phone. Oh my gosh, I wish I'd known about it a long time ago. But anyway, I use that do not disturb function all the time. And I actually have parameters set up on my phone. So my phone can only notify me from 7 a to 8 p. That's
Hmm.
it. 8 p.m. I don't need to talk to anybody after 8 p.m. I will get you the next day. So if you text me at 9 or 10, I will see it the next day. But for me, that has also helped with distractions. Like I feel I can be easily distracted. So when I put my phone on do not disturb, then I can go all in on content creation or
Hmm.
emails or whatever it is I need to do. So that's how I've built a habit around it. But I love a digital detox. And I would 100% agree, even 24 hours, because we're so used to, I don't even know what the count is now. I think last I heard it was 80 sometimes a day, or who knows how many times a minute, but how often we check our phone. And you don't realize how addicted you are until you set it down and let's say a 24-hour detox. Because I think, didn't you, maybe it's on Saturdays you don't do digital?
Yeah. So now, I mean, one of my space maker habits is I have a weekly day without technology. So
Uh,
that, I mean, I recommend that as a heart check, but uh, I have a full day. So Friday evening, we once we eat dinner, we light candles, we eat bread, we say our high low buffalo as a family. So what's our high from the day, a low from the day, and a buffalo? Something just funny or interesting. We say a prayer, and then we kickstart our day off. And I don't check my phone until that night on Saturday night. And it's not about technology. What I realized is, and this is in the tradition of Sabbath, but what I realized is that I want a true day of rest where I'm not working.
Yeah.
And because from a physiotherapy point of view, if you're an elite athlete and you never stop working at your body, you'll burn out and you won't actually be an elite athlete. And if you are an elite executive in the corporate world and you never deeply rest, well, then you'll never be at your best. Your productivity will be really suboptimal, even if you're working 70, 80 hours a week. And so when I ask the question to myself, well, what is work and what is rest, which are clearly important, I realize it's not simple to answer, because work for me isn't like physically laboring like an agrarian farmer. Work for me is doing this. I'm communicating with people online, I'm typing, I'm swiping, I'm using the internet. And then I realized that on my days off, I was typing and swiping and communicating on the internet, just using different apps. But the
Mm.
brain, from a neuroplastic point of view, can't tell the difference between Outlook and Instagram. And it's doing the same neural pathways. It is practicing the internet in exactly the same ways as if you were practicing like a musical instrument 60, 70 hours a week. And therefore, my mind was not rested and I was fractured and I was distracted and I never truly rested, because I'm a knowledge worker. So I must rest the mind, not just the body. And so that's why I disconnect a day a week, because I decide I need a day off from my work. And the only way I can do that is by turning off the internet, because the internet is my work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason. It's not because I'm having a digital Sabbath or a digital day off. It's that I want a day off work. And the only way I can truly not think about work is if I don't check my email and don't look at LinkedIn and don't find out what's happening on the news or in the share market, because all of that flips my brain back into work mode.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful because I fill my day with other stuff. I fill it with bacon and eggs and board games and writing and playing, gardening and having long coffees and having a day with no plans. We work really, really hard to have no commitments on that day so that we can wake up and actually just be.
Be.
And that's what allows me to be productive the rest of the week.
So I'm going to share for me what it was like the before and the after, the when I called that the recovering type A. But for me, before, go, 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 that's just what I knew through high school, through college, constant, like I never had free time. And then now I'm in a space of I actually crave the peace and the inner stillness and the calm. So I would love to hear from you. What is it like for you now when you've created, you're intentional, but you're taking the time and creating the space to disconnect, to tune in, to, for me, it's like just the inner peace and calm. So then I would love to hear from you. What it was it like before, kind of your wake up call, if you want to call it that, or this change in trajectory to where you are today, creating that space and the stillness. What's the difference?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. I'd love to say, you have those before and after shots, even like, hey, I was like this and then I exercised and now I had a body like, I don't know,
Yeah.
someone beautiful. And there is a sense I've had a few of those, metanoia, those paradigm experiences. But I must admit it's more of a weekly wrestle and a daily wrestle for me, where I'm learning to continue to put space in my life and to rest deeply or think deeply or to invest in people. And then I realized, wow, I'm back to kind of the crazy grind again. I mean, the irony, for example, is I wrote a book about making space. It won a bunch of awards. I did a TED talk, and then I've never been busier because I've got these people who want to know about how do you make space. I'm like, oh, my inbox is full now, and I'm working too hard again. And I've got so many podcast interviews because I'm talking to people about how they can actually live a slower life, and that's a bit hypocritical. But then again, it pushes me back into okay, I have to say no to a lot.
Yeah.
And once again, I have to make sure I put in my days of silence. I put in my time to read and journal in the morning. I can't neglect exercise. I have to put in the things that matter first in my life and then just accept that some of the opportunities that are coming my way will not be possible. And I'm sure that again, in another few months, I'll turn around and realize, wow, I'm struggling with space again. But what I've found is that the wrestle with space, the wrestle with seeking to have an intentional life, to live from the inside out, to know who I am and why I do what I do, in and around the craziness of being an entrepreneur and a businessman and an author and a speaker. It's the wrestle that causes me to reflect on who I am and what I value, and to become more convicted about what I'm meant to do. And so therefore I think that that wrestle with space and time is what makes me a better person. It grows my character. And so
Yeah.
I don't regret it. But I can't say it was once off, I was here and then I was there. It's more a continual process of learning to be a human in and around the busyness of life,
Yeah.
but putting space in as part of what matters. And that makes a big difference. Yeah.
I feel that too, because even, the busier I get and the more clients I take on, then it's like you can't pour from an empty cup. And for me, doing what I do, it's very important that I practice what I preach. And I know what it's like when I don't. And I know how more ease and freeing it is when I do. And so for me, it's just come down to I've built in my daily non negotiables, which is those morning practices, morning rituals, evening ones as well. And I'd love to hear from you. Are there any daily intentional practices you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of my daily space maker practices, so starting and ending the day without technology is one of the key ones for me, because the way you begin and end the day makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, rather than reach for my alarm clock and then suddenly, listen to the news or check email, which is what I did habitually, I now just sit there and I think about my day, and I think about the people I'm going to meet, and I reflect or pray about them, and then I do thankfulness. And I try not to check my phone until I've at least had a shower. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but it's quite different to start
Mm.
the day with your own thoughts rather than bad news or other people's thoughts. And then to end the day, uh, to actually have a conversation with my wife rather than us being on our phones in bed, that's a really big difference to how we finish the day. So
Yeah.
that's one practice each day. A daily a daily meal without technology is really valuable to us to connect as a family.
Mm.
And there's heaps of research in that space that if you can talk around a table as a family, your kids will be healthier, they'll be happier, they'll have better numeracy, literacy, they'll have better grades, they'll have less debt when they're adults. It's a keystone habit, and it requires that you just talk to each other, but technology gets in the way. I exercise a few times a week without earbuds, where I don't listen to podcasts and audiobooks, because I want to be present and I want to think about the information in my world rather than filling my mind with other people's information. And that helps me to process what I've listened to and apply it to my life. So
Yeah.
so I've got a lot of daily practices. I've got some weekly practices and I've got some annual practices, but all of that adds up to help me live an intentional space-filled life.
I love that. And I think ultimately, like I know in the last few years, the big thing out there was to have a morning routine. And there's no one way to do this. I think what we're offering are different ways, but it's important to find those mindfulness and intentional practices, whatever that looks like for you.
Absolutely.
So, question: what do you believe is a key takeaway you want listeners to get?
Hmm. We've talked a lot about the inner life and about living by, well, living by design, but to get there, we need to make some space. So, yeah, I'd encourage you, where you can, unplug from your technology, think about your relationship with the online world, and be brave enough to feel your emotions, to think your deeper thoughts, and to move through that painful curve of not liking yourself and not liking what you're feeling, to get to that beautiful space where you can sit quietly and be enough.
The image I just got, the way you said that was literally, like a cocoon. A butterfly goes through that quote dark period, that discomfort, and has to break free to come out of the. And so we're suggesting that in order to get to that butterfly stage, you feel it to heal it.
And that's the spiritual life. That is how to be productive. That is how to be deeply human and live your own life rather than someone else's script. I think it's the only way.
You speak my language. I'd love to wrap up the interview, so I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Yep, here we go.
What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
I've recently read Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks, and that's excellent. It's about time management and productivity. There, I can do books. I just can't do quotes. Uh, it's a time management book about why we have limited time and what to and how to see life differently because of it. It's worth reading.
Interesting. Fair enough. All right, final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
I would say I'm really thankful for how my life has actually turned out. It's turned out more remarkable and more interesting and better than I think I would have thought. So I wouldn't change anything, but I would say don't stress so much about the process. Enjoy it more and don't be so worried the whole time.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that, and such a great note to end on. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I appreciate the chat.